1 night of sleep is nothing, man. Yeah, your body thinks it's stressed out. It releases your cortisol, and of course, cortisol releases your blood sugar. I always point out to people that artificial lighting itself is phototoxicity. Your day begins at the time that you sleep, right? Finish sleep. Next, put it at the top of your list.
When you come to the sleep, the food anchoring, you typically have a meal at the same time.
The body actually has to cool down in order to be able to sleep.
Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Scott Scher. I'm a board-certified internal medicine physician, specialized in hyperbaric medicine. I'm also the Chief Operating Officer of Health Optimization Medicine and Practice and Transcriptions. Dr. Ted, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Dr. Ted Achacoso. I'm a doctor of medicine. I'm also trained in pharmacology and toxicology, in interventional neuroradiology, in medical informatics, artificial intelligence, socially responsible finance, and other such wonderful things. I am also the founder of Transcriptions and Health Optimization Medicine and Practice Association.
We're back again, Dr. Ted, and today we're going to talk about one of your favorite topics, and mine, but definitely more your favorite topic, is sleep. And we're going to be watching a video here by Tom DeLauer. Tom's a friend, and he's a great educator overall. He's really great at giving some real meat to topics that a lot of people don't want to think about, especially when it comes to sleep deprivation. I remember when I was in medical school, we used to say that sleep was for quitters. That was not an ideal way to think about it.
There was even a movement before, right? To split your sleep.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we can talk about that. All the different sleep techniques that people use.
What your goals are. So let's go ahead and jump right in. What happens after just a night or two of poor sleep? Well, with this, we look at a study that was published in the journal Obesity, and it's pretty interesting. They had subjects do 2 nights of normal sleep, and then they had them do 5 nights of restricted sleep, where they brought them down to 5 or 6 hours of sleep for 5 nights. And then they had them do a 12-hour recovery sleep at the end of that. And they compared this to a 10-hour control. Now, I know a lot of us aren't sleeping 10 hours, but it was to get a very solid baseline of super well rested. In the mornings, they measured their resting metabolic rate. And what they found is that the group that was sleep deprived had a 2.6% reduction in their actual resting metabolic rate. That doesn't sound like much, but we're talking after just a day or two, this starts to happen. Their entire ability to burn calories decreases. It's huge. That is a big, big problem, right? Now, what was very good in this is that they found when they had them do the recovery sleep ultimately helped them regain this, and it restored back to normal.
Let's talk about this. 1 night of sleep, significant sleep deprivation, not that awesome, right?
1 night of sleep is nothing, man. No, a 1 night of sleep is actually enough if you measure your cytokine levels or inflammatory levels. And I always proceed that way because the body's response to any insult or injury is really a molecular inflammation, not the gross inflammation that we see from insect bites, but more of a molecular inflammation. What that does is actually it stresses your body out, right? So cortisol is released, you get hungrier, right? And also, of course, there's dysregulation of your leptin metabolism, right? The one that keeps you sated is suddenly off the hook, and you are actually ravenous to eat.
So leptin is, what is leptin? So for those that aren't.
It's a hormone, it's called the satiety hormone, right? Yeah. I'm old enough to go on 72-hour duties as a physician in training.
I remember people like you telling me how hard it used to be.
Yes, and they babied the doctors now. Yeah. But really, it was very, very difficult to stay up for more than 24 hours, much less than 72. And you find yourself eating probably 10% more a day.
Yeah, right. I remember getting starving at like 3 o'clock in the morning when your body temperature drops. Yeah, you just want to eat to increase your thermodynamics.
Yeah, your body thinks it's stressed out, right? Yeah. That's why one of the solutions if you're stressed out is to provide you with more energy. So it releases your cortisol, and of course cortisol releases your blood sugar. Right? But at the same time, you're also feeling hungry because your satiety hormone has been affected.
Yeah, it's so interesting.
It's like, well, it's a many faceted whammy, not just a double whammy. Because of that.
Yeah, I remember we are the only animals that purposefully deprive ourselves of sleep. There's no other animal that does that unless they're in some sort of stressful situation.
Exactly. When was the light bulb invented? Was it 1876 or something like that?
Yeah.
So, we have technology right now that actually allow us to mimic the daylight inside our homes, right? There are different types of lighting that you can do. It's automated and so on, so that you don't deprive yourself of sleep that much. However, I always point out to people that artificial lighting itself is phototoxicity, right?
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
A poison using light, and we've been poisoning ourselves since we invented the light bulb,
Right.
really.
Absolutely.
Or when we discovered fire, when we realized that we could sit around the campfire.
Yeah. Well, I heard that fire was different, though, that fire has different types of light as
Right.
far as your light in your room, especially like fluorescence or bright white lights,
Right.
comparatively speaking. So I think fire doesn't really suppress melatonin as far as I was understood.
It doesn't suppress melatonin that much,
That much,
right?
okay, yeah.
Any light would,
Any light
but
would,
it
yeah.
doesn't suppress melatonin that much. Like,
Yeah.
for example, the rays of the sun in the morning,
Yeah,
is enough to just.
True.
Or when you're in a hotel and your hotel doesn't provide you with like floor lighting to go to the bathroom, then you
Yeah.
turn on the light and boom, suddenly you can't sleep anymore, right?
Yeah. Very artificial.
Specifically after just one night of bad sleep. Well, if this, we look at a study that was published in Physiology Reports. Now, this was more extreme. This looked at one night of total sleep deprivation. Like if you pulled an all-nighter,
Did you
because you're
see
cramming
that?
for something, or you just can't
All-nighters?
sleep, you literally pull an all-nighter.
Yeah.
Pretty
I
wild.
know.
This study found that this decreased muscle protein synthesis 18%. The ability to actually build muscle and repair went down 18%, and a 21% increase in cortisol. So you couple those together, and that's terrible. Not to mention a 24% decrease in testosterone. I mean, I would say the last thing that's on your mind is really procreating when you haven't slept, but still, the fact that all these things together, that's a huge problem. Next, we want to look at what happens after about a week. Let's say you're sleep deprived for a week and you just missed a few hours. Well, there was a cool study published in Chest that looked at this. This looked at 8 nights of normal sleep compared to getting about 2/3 of your normal sleep. So this is something that could easily happen if even you're like, just have a busy week and you just don't have time. You got to spend more time at the office.
So no all-nighters for you in medical school? I never did them either.
No,
I couldn't imagine
no.
how people could try to do those.
Even in my pre-med was in biology, right?
Yeah.
And I would always, like, during exam day, people would come in bleary-eyed. And
Yeah.
And then I asked them, what are you doing? Oh, I pulled an all-nighter and we were cramming. I said, what's cramming?
I love that. Well, you were not the type that needed to cram, let's be honest. But what I always found is that even just a little bit of sleep, so when I was on call, and so I wasn't doing the 72-hour calls when I was in medical school residency, I was doing the 30-hour calls. But even if I just got like 10 or 15 minutes, I was so much of a better human the next day than I got when I got 0. I mean, it's not surprising that your cortisol's up the roof and your testosterone's down in the tank.
Oh, what's more terrible is that you are listening to an audit of, why a patient died and all of that, and you're actually subjected to the stress of that, and then you're doing micro sleep, right? In the middle of the sentence bleeps out, and it's like, what happened there? And you're at the end of a 72-hour shift.
Yeah.
It's like, holy fuck.
Yeah, not safe, right? Not safe. Well, they talk about medical errors as being a significant cause of death in the United States and across the world, right? And I think that's why they have changed work hours over the years. But there's positives and negatives to that, I think, depending on what you're doing as far as your practice and your residency.
Yeah, I think overall, the data before, I don't know what it is now, iatrogenic errors were actually 20%.
Yeah.
Right?
I heard something like the top 3 causes of death in the United States. It's crazy. Yeah. Don't quote me on that, but it's significant.
I think AI might do a lot better than that.
That's why the AI doctor of the future, right? Or the doctor of the now.
Frazzled. So you're just getting slightly less sleep over the course of a week. This is where it gets crazy. The sleep-deprived group ended up consuming 559 more calories per day on average. What the heck? Whereas the group that was fully rested, the control group, actually consumed about 118 calories less. That's a 677 calorie difference between the two groups. That adds up tremendously. Over the course of a week, we're talking a pound, give or take, of fat potentially. That's unbelievable just by being sleep deprived versus rested. Now, if that doesn't make you want to prioritize sleep, I don't know what will. But what's actually very wild about this was that there was no change in hunger hormones. They didn't see a change in ghrelin or things that would normally make people hungry. So we look at another study published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, and this clears it up a little bit more. They found that when people were sleep deprived, there was more neuronal activity in response to food pictures or food in general. So like the idea of food just lit up the brain more, made people want to eat more. And that alone will drive your desire to eat and ultimately your caloric intake. So when you're tired, food just seems more appealing. The solution that I have for you if you are sleep deprived is to front load your day with as much protein as possible. Protein is going to satiate you and can help override these signals a little bit. So you want to eat those eggs, you want to eat the steak, you want to eat the protein, get what you can in. I put a link down below for the protein shake that I recommend having in the morning.
What do you think about that, Ted?
I didn't know about that study where leptin was not involved, the ghrelin was not involved. But I do know in practice that, if it's already 3 a.m. and you've been up for the whole day and you're not having munchies, you're just really eating out of sleep deprivation.
Yeah, the increased neuronal activity is not surprising, right? This is probably more of a sympathetic activation, and you're more kind of in the fight or flight mode and not able to rest. And I think and then there's the combination of just the inflammatory aspects, and we talked about molecular inflammation that's just kind of getting out of control. The body's going into like sort of, what is the word, like the hibernation type of mode, like oh shit, I need to eat, I need to like protect myself, I'm going to be, in some sort of inflamed state for a while, so I need to get as many calories as I can, kind of thing.
Yeah, in fact, the way I teach my students, including you, is that if you imagine, your days divided into yin and yang.
Yeah.
We've made the daylight, the yang side of it, just so much longer, such that the yin is getting a short shrift. It's like it's a time when you dream, and it's a time when you can actually get the restorative deep sleep and your REM sleep, your memory consolidation, and all of that. And that's unfortunate because you're turning your stomach and your intestines on usually at a time when they're supposed to be resting or absorbing or doing something else, right?
Yeah.
So you're pressing them to do service. So that's an additional energy requirement for the body as well.
Yeah.
So if you take a look at chronically deprived people, not only are they obese and massively inflamed in terms of their cytokine panels, or even simple HSCRP, right?
Yeah.
You could see that they develop all of these chronic diseases, right? Metabolic diseases, heart disease, diabetes, etc. Because lack of sleep, the cytokines themselves, inflammatory cytokines, can cause insulin resistance, right?
This reminds me very much of your travel to the Philippines.
Yeah.
And people that are chronically on planes and with jet lag, and the gut bacteria wanting to be sleeping when you want to be awake and things like that, right? So
yes, Philippines is from the east coast of the United States, either 12 or 13 hours, depending on daylight savings time. And at midnight, when you're supposed to be sleeping or there, you're very hungry for lunch.
Yeah.
And this goes on for a while, right? And the general rule of thumb is 1 day per hour of time zone change. So imagine if you're just going there, and lucky for me, I used to go for 30 days at a time. But already 12 days is already spent adjusting. But it is very, very important. Otherwise, I'll meet my patients and be totally grumpy.
Yeah, you've mentioned though in the past that you found a way to kind of have a meal anchor, right? When you're traveling. That seems to be really helpful, right?
Yeah, there are two. I love the word anchor. Because the first one, a technique that I taught you is sleep anchoring technique. It's a very simple technique to make sleep your priority in your schedule, right? So your day begins at the time that you sleep. So choose at the time so you won't skimp on the sleep. So especially like you're a list guy, right? Finish sleep next. Put it at the top of your list, right? As a way to live. That's a very simple sleep anchoring technique. And then my meal anchoring technique is that from the studies that initially just from observations, now studies have come up that the gut is really one of the last to reverse, to basically go into the different circadian rhythm. So if you poop in the morning here in the United States, and you're not still pooping in the morning in Manila, then you're not fully
acclimated.
However, you will notice that because you will wake at different times of the night, right? And then until it actually hits you in the morning. But that's a good sign. The studies have shown that gut microbiota changes within 72 hours, also a change in cuisine. All of these things. So sleep deficiency is really a multifaceted issue, right?
When you're talking about the sleep anchoring, I got that 100%. Your day starts when you go to bed, not when you wake up. I think that's great. My patients love that. I love that. When you come to the sleep the food anchoring.
Yeah.
You typically have a meal at the same time.
A meal at the same time.
Right.
For example, my dinner here is around 7:30 in the evening.
Right.
So the equivalent time there is 7:30 in the morning. So I don't normally eat breakfast because I only eat 2 meals a day.
Right.
So I will eat 7:30 a.m.
Right.
Over there, a breakfast.
And that seems to help as far as getting that microbiota to shift a little bit.
Seems to anchor my microbiota nicely,
Yeah.
except for the fact that I'm eating a different breakfast over there.
Right, it's not going to be the same kind of
More
breakfast.
delicious ones in here than I
would
would say,
imagine, yeah.
however.
What happens after 3 weeks is really wild. This is when true metabolic hormone changes start to happen. And this study was interesting because it looks at just going to bed a little bit later. This study was published in the journal Metabolism, and it had subjects just go to bed an hour and a half later than they normally do. Sometimes they'd wake up at the same time, sometimes they'd wake up later, but generally just going to bed later. And what they found this did was it decreased their insulin sensitivity, okay, and it increased their overall cortisol, not to mention it increased their weight, and it decreased their leptin. Now, what does this mean? What does this do? Well, when we decrease our overall leptin, we're not signaling to the brain that we're satiated. If leptin is elevated, it's going to tell your brain, hey, you're satiated, you're good. But when leptin's low, the brain is seeking out food because leptin signals that there's enough food on hand. Okay. Now, additionally, what's going to happen if your insulin sensitivity goes down is that means that you have a higher rate of what's called de novo lipogenesis potentially occurring. What could happen here is that is when carbohydrates potentially turn into fat, particularly in caloric surplus. So if you're in a surplus and you eat carbohydrates, yes, you run the risk of them turning into fat. But when you're in a situation where your insulin sensitivity is low and you're in a surplus, then you run an even higher risk of it turning into fat. And where does it like to deposit? It likes to deposit in the abdominal area and in the visceral area surrounding our liver and underneath our skin surrounding our organs. Not just the subcutaneous fat, but the bad visceral fat. So hugely problematic when you have metabolic hormone changes after a few weeks. But then if we just creep it up a week more, what happens after a month is when things get really wild, because this particular study looked at people that were dieting. They were on a caloric restrictive diet. So it was published in the journal Sleep, and it had subjects go on a calorically restricted diet or calorie restriction plus sleep restriction. Guess how much though? Only restricting sleep by 3 hours over the course of a week. So really not that much sleep, but enough to clearly add up as far as the outcome. They found that the group that had restricted calories with sleep restriction lost the same amount of weight as the other group because calories were matched, but they lost less fat mass. They lost more muscle and held on to their fat. It also found that the respiratory quotient decreased. When the respiratory quotient decreased, that means that we noticed there was less fat being oxidized. So literally oxidizing less fat, and you increase glycolysis, you're increasing carbohydrate utilization, probably because the body's in a mode of stress and it's also just less efficient. Efficiency, you can run in beta oxidation and fatty acid oxidation. So because the body was so stressed, the respiratory quotient went down and they burned less overall fat. Finally, when you start creeping this up to 60 days, you have literal changes in your HDL particle size. Now, HDL cholesterol is a good cholesterol, no matter which way you spin it. Okay, no matter where you stand in the cholesterol equation, like cholesterols that are HDL are good, okay? They help us. But they also are heavily correlated with abdominal fat when the particle size is smaller. So the study that was published in Sleep Advances took a look at caloric restriction or caloric restriction plus sleep restriction again, and they found that in the caloric restriction plus sleep restriction, they both lost weight, right? But the caloric restriction and sleep restriction group had a reduction in HDL particle size. Reductions in HDL particle size are directly associated with abdominal fat, not to mention just the health effect. So there's something going on here that's actually starting to change at a much more core level when people are sleep deprived. So don't get me wrong, after 60 days, this isn't the only thing that's happening. All of the above is happening too. Everything we've talked about in conjunction with this, with the exception of maybe the total sleep deprivation study, because you're not totally sleep deprived every night. But a couple things to keep in mind. If you do not sleep well, like one night, don't panic, just increase your protein and decrease your carbohydrates a little bit that day, unless you feel extra stressed and you're active. If you're stressed but you're active, carbohydrates can blunt cortisol, because insulin will blunt cortisol. But what I don't want you to do is say, I didn't sleep well, let me eat a bunch of carbohydrates and not be active. What I would recommend is say, hey, if you're ultra stressed out, a few carbs might help you get through a workout, but you're much better off just spiking your protein throughout the day and going into damage control mode. You're not going to be breaking records with sleep deprivation.
There's a lot of good information there, actually. I mean, he talked about here about protein as far as like the meal. What do you think about protein?
No, this is now switching between acute sleep deprivation and chronic sleep deprivation.
Right.
And, I'm not a sleep expert. I don't know what the definition of a chronic sleep deprivation is.
Yeah.
Right? I think many parents of newborns are chronically sleep deprived for about 2 years.
At least.
So, and that's
Or
why
if you have four,
that's
it's
why
for
they
8 years.
gain the mom bod and the dad bod, for taking care of their kids, if they do take care of their kids.
Yeah.
Protein is actually harder for the body to digest, right? It requires a little bit more energy to break it down. It uses a different set of enzymes. The other thing that it does is that, the caloric yield per gram is 494, right? Fats and proteins, respectively. It also has what's called the thermic effect of food, which means it warms your body up.
Right.
And you know that also the body actually has to cool down in order to be able to sleep, right?
Yes.
So you could see,
Yes. That's why protein at
yeah.
night can be difficult for some people, right?
Yeah, what I do is my most proteinaceous meal is actually at night, but my rule of thumb here for people who would actually listen is, you can eat the protein, but don't sleep within 3 hours of your last meal. It's good anyway because the gastric emptying time is about 3 hours, right?
Yeah, I really think this is really good information. I think that most people think they can get less sleep than they actually need. But then when you start tracking things and start realizing, what I found was interesting about one of the studies he mentioned is that just increasing the time that you went to bed later. So I think this just kind of goes to the idea that whatever time it is you go to bed, go to bed that time. As routinely as possible, right?
However, in this world that we've created, what time zone are you referring to, right? Many people know this now, that my definition of heaven was being in the same time zone for at least 2 weeks.
Right.
And for like 15 or 20 years or so, I was in hell most of the time.
And your gut paid the price, right?
Yeah,
you always talked about having to get like a bigger belt size when you were traveling.
It's just incredible.
There's all the inflammation, right?
Right, and I know that many people will hate me for this, but actually the COVID break, helped me reset a lot of this stuff, the sleep, the stress of travel, and so on. But the huge component of it is sleep, because I was able to regularize my sleep.
Yes,
right.
Make it so it's routine. You're going. So even if you go to bed, I know you go to bed later because you're working with patients in Manila. But you're going to bed at the same time. Just about every night, right?
That was more difficult when I had patients in Europe.
Oh yeah, sure.
It was a lot more difficult. And so when those shut down during the COVID, I said, well, let's continue shutting them down. Because it really takes a toll on you. Right?
Yeah, it does. I mean, I think, look, we know that sleep is one of the most important things that we need. In fact, we've talked about the evolutionary progression of animals or even species in general. We think that sleep was the base state, right?
If female DNA is like the basis for everything, and then male is a specialized form, I think the sleep or the parasympathetic form was there evolutionarily first, right? Well, it's true. Evolutionary is there because the nervous system developed only much later. And then we reclassify this to that. But it's the same thing, right? From basically a restful, floaty kind of jellyfish, and then we evolved to this, like land mammals who are just going. We're moving and moving, really depriving ourselves of sleep only to do what? To find food. And mates.
Yes.
So that's it.
Fitness and function. It always comes back down to that.
And our society is so bored right now. They lack. They basically lose sleep, especially the kids. It's really unfortunate that when they continue playing these games.
I can't figure it out though, Ted. Like, why do my kids never want to go to bed? Like, why? Like, if somebody told me to go to bed, I'd be like, thank you, I want to go to bed. But like, your kids never want to go to bed. I don't know why that is.
I think it's mental, but actually their physiology would actually dictate them to go to bed.
Interesting.
Because they have normally higher growth hormones, right? So if you compare, for example, when you were a younger man and you wanted to party at night, you had those urges because you still had high growth hormone.
Growth hormone.
Right?
Okay.
Yeah.
That's the
And you could do that. You could actually fake that out if you want to have a night out, and not feel terrible the next day. You just inject yourself with some growth hormone. That's not medical advice. That's a cheat, by the way.
That's the ultimate Ferrari hormone activation optimization strategy by Dr. Ted. Yes.
Well, another thing is something that's also counterintuitive, right? If you're stressed out, the hormone that's actually helping you there is cortisol, right? So you could actually take for a very short course of cortisol, as I do for jet lag, right? I take it at high dose with tapering to nothing for 5 days, just to get to get the body adapted to the stress, right? So
our cortisol is the highest in the morning, typically when we wake up, and lowest when we go to bed.
Yeah, because
if you can mimic that with the hydrocortisone, it can help you make that transition, right?
Yeah, if you think evolutionarily, again, we're meant to wake up when the sun's rays hit our skin. then your cortisol rises, and so does your thyroid hormone,
Yeah.
right? And that's how you naturally wake up.
Right.
However, we have houses and buildings now with, with rooms that have basements with no window. And the solution is for us to, create an artificial window that looks like you're looking at something outside.
Sounds like an AI bot right there.
No, it's been there for a while.
I know, yeah. Well, Dr. Ted, this has been great. Thanks so much. This is a great video to talk about sleep deprivation, about changes in metabolism, sleep anchoring techniques that Dr. Ted has had for a long time, sleep eating techniques, and anchoring your food as well. So yeah, thanks. It's been fun.
And this is actually a good one to see the progression from acute to chronic.
Yeah.
Sleep deprivation.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
And the marker there is that how irritated are you with your spouse? That's your marker.
Or your
Day
children.
one, or your children.
Oh, I definitely see this with me. If I'm sleep deprived, their voices just sound so much louder.
Yeah, and irritating.
And irritating.
Shrill.
Yes,
Shrill.
this happened to me just 2 days ago. Thank you for listening, everybody. Just remember, what we just spoke about is not medical advice. Please talk to your practitioner if you're going to change, start, do anything that requires medical supervision.